is the Oz report for March 5th, 2022. And let's start with the Astrahus. The Astrahus, I think I mentioned this last week as well. The Astrahus had a massive jump in price, actually. So much so that I wrote to CCP asking if they might have a leak in the CSM, because there are changes to structures announced. We don't know what they're going to be. Somebody could be speculating on the BPCs for them changing. And the Astrahus just seems to be one where we didn't have a drastic increase in volume, but we had a drastic increase in price, up to about 900 million from previously around 600 million. So that's a massive increase in price on the Astrahus. I don't know what it is. I'm sure somebody could educate me on this, but I don't know, and I haven't found out in the last few days. This, the result of this is that the input materials, broadcast node, recursive computing module, sterile conduits, and wetware mainframe, those all jumped in price. If you're holding those still, my advice is to sell them now, because that demand is certainly something that is going to be temporary. And then also we saw today contaminated Lorentz fluid really spike, and that's for tier 1 structure rigs. So there's something going on. Somebody is buying a lot of them. Somebody's building a lot of them. So this is something that is very interesting. CCP told me that there's nothing to worry about. That certainly is not a leak, but I don't have an explanation yet. So I don't know if this is a speculation on on some trader, or if this is it has some other reason, maybe an alliance just needing a lot of Astrahus at one time. Anyway, let's move into caps and faction ships. So we have seen, I think in mid-February, we saw the Road to FanFest blog that was put out by CCP, and it mentioned in there this, I quote, "As mentioned in the winter status update, we want faction ships, dreads, and other capitals to be out in space, wreaking havoc on the battlefield via well-orchestrated dread bombs or other means. To that extent, blueprint requirements will be updated prior to FanFest." Okay? The only way I can read that is that they are going to somehow drop the price and walk back some of the changes they implemented for capitals, faction ships, and for capitals and faction ships. So and battleships, I guess. So what I think they're going to do has three scenarios. Either they're going to attack, and this is the most likely one, they're going to reduce the number of P1 PI needed. So bacteria, proteins, water. These have all pretty much spiked. They're easy to produce, but hard to move. So this could be one thing that they might be doing. The reason they want to do this is because right now nobody is building capitals or flying capitals because they're way too expensive and they're trading below what it actually costs to build them. So if they want to alleviate that, they could reduce P1 PI, bacteria, proteins, water, or they could reduce the R4 requirement, atmospheric gases, evaporate deposits, hydrocarbons, or silicates. These components are all needed for the auto integrity preservation seal, the core temperature regulator, and the life support unit, which are new components that were introduced in the patch earlier last year. So they could do that, and there might be also a chance that they will reduce the mycosarosin requirements, so the null gas requirements. And so, you know, one of the three things is likely from my point of view. So I think one thing that is definitely going to happen is that we're going to see a drop in pricing in capitals. In capitals, it's all going to depend on whether the new construction price is actually below the current market price, which is kept down by stockpiles. For faction ships, I think it's fairly certain that we're going to see a reduction in price. So the big lesson learned out of that dev blog is that you need to get rid of if you have capital sitting around that you have as an investment, or you have faction ships sitting around as an investment that were impacted by this big industry patch, then it's probably time to sell them, because between now and early May is when they're going to walk back some of these changes, or introduce completely new changes, which I would think would be very weird though. So I think it's going to be one of these 3 things that they're going to do, and that's going to have a huge impact, right, on all of this. Let's also talk Cerebral Accelerators, right? Like in the last weeks. If I'm going to pull up my handy skill point overview again for this. So the convergent Cerebral Accelerators, they will cease to work in 3 days' time on March 8th. The extended ones you can then still take on that day, and they will be they will work for a few days longer if you take them on that last day. If you look at the ISK per SP pricing right now, unsurprisingly, the convergent ones, that price is dropping down quickly, because people are selling any that they have left now in a panic to not get stuck with them. So if you still want to take the basic ones, they're actually quite cheap right now. Just don't buy a lot of them. The extended ones are also quite good. The potent ones are basically too expensive. And again, always keep in mind that it has to be cheaper than it would be for you to take a large skill injector or a small skill injector. The reason I say that is because if you look at the bonding ones, those are the ones that are still going to be valid for another month, then you can see that they have reached pricing that makes absolutely no sense. Nobody in their right mind should be buying these unless you have over 80 million SP, in which case large skill injectors are so expensive for you to take per SP that they could actually make sense. But these right now, they've reached insane pricing, and so I would not buy any bonding ones anymore, especially not for investment, but even for taking them. For most characters, a large skill injector is actually going to be cheaper to take if you look at it per SP, and it's going to be instant, so it's going to be the better deal, right? So be careful there. If we're looking at the expert Cerebral Accelerators that we talked about in the last weeks as well, there was the big sale ended for them. You can see they're slowly climbing in price again, and this is something that we predicted last week. So you know, if you can get these on buy orders, fantastic. Still, they're still very cheap. I would expect them to go back to the billion price tag that they have, and the buy price right now is at 820 million. So that's still a good deal. The Master at Arms ones are cheap by association. The only reason these are cheap is because there are a lot of other Cerebral Accelerators that are affordable in the game right now. And so these, as options fall away, are also going to increase in price again. So Master at Arms Cerebral Accelerators can be a good investment if you can get them on buy orders. Now, let's talk fuel blocks real quick. The reason I mentioned fuel blocks is because of coolant. Coolant had a sharp price drop. And that wouldn't be interesting except for the only real use for coolant, unless you're using it to import for other PI goods, is fuel blocks. And we've seen a huge demand for fuel blocks components lately. And I speculated, and we've speculated on stream, that this is because the price of ice has dropped so sharply because there's such an overabundance of it in the world that people are producing a lot of fuel blocks because they're thinking it's very, very cheap, maybe not calculating the price drop that you're actually seeing in fuel blocks in real time as well. If you're looking at the price developments in fuel blocks, it's just it has gone down very, very sharply, pretty much in line with the amount of ice being mined in the game. And so you can see all of these have gone to 15k or below, and the drop in price in coolant that you see here, it actually dropped below 10k today, might indicate that people are actually stopping that. So this might actually be a first indicator of people stopping to build an abundance of fuel blocks, and maybe that's also an indicator of fuel block prices finally stabilizing. at around 15k, which would make sense. You know, because at some point there's going to be demand actually equaling out. You never know though. This is a new situation in the market, so just keep an eye on it. I just thought it was interesting that Coolant, you had such a sharp decrease in the last few days, and see if, you know, that would be an early indicator, an early warning of fuel block production stopping. Let's also talk about Moongoo, and Moongoo. I talked about that early on stream. We've just seen a ton of a lot of Moongoo prices dropping. Just as an example, cadmium, very much used in tier 2 production. Thulium crashed, platinum crashed. These are all Moongoo that have dropped significantly. This is in part due to compression coming, and in part due to just more Moongoo being released into the wild, so to speak, and more Moongoo being mined, as we can clearly see from the monthly economic report. And that means that we have very, very low Moongoo prices, so we should see a drop in tier 2 ships and other things using Moongoo as well. As an example, I want to show the Marauders. So the Kronos, you can get the Kronos right now at around 1 billion, which is very, very cheap. It hasn't been this cheap in a long time, and that's because about a fourth to a third of the price depends on that Moongoo. And we see, if you look at the Paladin and the Golem, you see on the other Marauders, you see similar price decreases. So that is something that people that fly these ships, people that depend on buying these ships, are going to like. Traders like me don't really like this, because this means that our stacks of Moongoo are decreasing. Of course, with the advent of compression coming in, I don't know, next week or whenever it is, we will see a more efficient Moongoo market. We will see Moongoo being able to be shipped around more, and for one, you would expect this to decrease the price even further, because you will have a more efficient market. On the other hand, it might also drive some demand, because different production scenarios become possible that just might not have been possible before. So, last two items. Megathron. Megathron is... the reason I mentioned the Megathron specifically is because there's almost none left in the JITA market, which is exciting. If you look at the Megathron, about 20 to 30 are traded every day, and there's less than 20 left in the market. So this typically would indicate that there's a possibility of a price jump, especially because you see different tiers here. There's 3 left at 301, but then it pretty quickly jumps into the 320s and 330s. So this is quite exciting. So, you know, you can do some market shenanigans with the Megathron there. And last but not least, Plex has hit ridiculously high prices, and the reason for that being is because we saw a sale launch yesterday on Omega Time. So Omega Time now in the EVE store takes 15% less Plex than it usually does, and that means that everyone and their mother is now resubbing with Plex. Those that do it anyway, that don't spend cash. And that means that an immediate demand for Plex was created, and you would expect that Plex price to jump about 10 to 15% to compensate for that. So that's something that's expected. It also means that these sales have a big impact on EVE's biggest market. I mentioned that earlier. Plex is 3 to 4 trillion traded a day. So Plex alone is 20 to 30% of the Forge market, and that means that something like this is such a huge market movement that compensates for pretty much anything else that's going on in the game. That's just very interesting. All right, that's it for the Oz report. I'll see you guys next week, and we're going to return to the regular stream.